It's 58% up on RLEGP, 51% up on IRDP, doubling NREP virtually. Are these unusual, or have they happened quite frequently?
I do not recollect increases of these order in the budget, in the past budget.
I see. Okay, I just want to get back to actually where the budget is as far as Parliament is concerned. I've said that it's a much longer than normal speech. By now, the finance ministers would have normally be winding up, but actually here we are, about halfway through the speech, part A, and the really juicy bit is still to come. He's finished his survey of the economy. We had that picture. We've had his non-tax proposals, which are basically unemployment and various other proposals on that, interest rates up on provident funds. We've had the budget for last year, budget deficit, which has gone up to 4,490 crores, 1,000 crores more than anticipated. And he's finished a few things for next year, which are quite astounding. If I can get you, Suman. We were wondering whether, at the beginning, whether this would be a tidying up budget, a tinkering and tampering budget. Do you think these kind of figures do seem to be, it's stretching in one direction? When we look at part B of the speech, are we going to get a lot of tax increases to compensate for this?
Well, I think it's very clear that the finance minister, who by the definition that Lakshmi gave, has a lot of imagination in terms of the deficit, has made a very definite statement. He's increasing outlays. He's putting money that he's going to have to find in the next half of the budget into programs which are going to make an impact on rural employment, on rural development, because I think these areas have been neglected before. And I think there's a very definite statement that he's making. He's done something for the urban income earner in his last budget. He's now doing something for the countryside, the unemployed, the farmer. And I'm sure in the next half we'll know what he's going to do for the corporate sector and
but industry. The key thing is it going to be good news or bad news? Given these kind of outlays, Lakshmi, first of all, what do you feel about these kind of massive increases in expenditures?
Well, in the kind of programs that you have mentioned where increases have taken place, they should be welcome.
But can I just ask you, there is a criticism that often in these kind of programs there are leakages. The funds don't actually reach the people that they're meant to reach.
I didn't repeat myself on that because I had said that earlier,
yes,
that mere increases should not satisfy us. But in any case, if there is an increase in the allocation, that by itself, I think, is a good starting point that should be welcome, and hope it will be followed up by the other kind of measures. The only question that you asked is that, does it mean, what does it implication for tax collection? Already administered prices suggested that what the public sector was supposed to do, since they didn't do it, burden was passed on the public to pay for what they didn't do. So if he's going to come up with that, if
they pass this kind of burden onto the public, onto the middle class man, would you subscribe to? Do you think that's justified, or is that unfair?
No, insofar as the burden placement is concerned, we have yet to know on whom he has placed it. I'm only hoping that he will also extract some more savings out of the public sector, because that is the crux on which the 7th plan assumptions are made.
Pranay, the other thing we don't know as yet is what the anticipated budget deficit is going to be on existing tax rates.
Yes.
Given these sorts of expenditures.
Yes, yes. But I just wanted to get to ask Professor Khushru a quick question. Professor Khushru, if you were a poor man, would you be happy now?
Look, this is what I wanted to actually intervene in. One of the weaknesses of the IRDP and some other programs focused on anti-poverty measures was that the backup programs to support those programs were very weak. For example, if 2 million buffaloes were required in the 6th plan, then there was no provision in the 6th plan for the generation of 2 million buffaloes. If X 100,000 sewing machines were required for women, there was very little provision for generation of sewing machines. Backup programs were absent. One of the reasons why the program, though it did well on the whole, didn't do all that well. I think this provision is, I'm sure, to back up those programs much better so that the programs come into their own. I would be happy if I were poor.
You would be happy
in this present.
You would be happy.
Yes.
I see. Bimal, I just want to know, since you're the only one here who has some kind of more information than the rest of us, could you give us a little more detail about these programs? I mean, up 93%. up on what, and what exactly does it mean? Again, just explaining it to the normal viewer, what does it mean? 93% is a figure, but in real terms, what does it imply?
No, I think, yeah. I mean, for the average viewer, I would say it implies nearly sort of doubling of some programs and sort of 75%. Or,
yes, that's fair.
I mean, that the programs are going to be either twice as large or 3/4 as large as before. Now, what do they do? I mean, the IRDP program, as you know probably, this is for the poorest of the poor. I mean, that is the whole idea is asset building, that you buy a buffalo or you buy a sewing machine, as Professor Khushro was saying, or you're given an asset with which you can earn a certain income. Now, leakages are going to be there. I mean, leakages in all programs are there. But what is important is that these programs, all the evaluation studies that have been done on these, that they have benefited a substantial number of poor in our countryside. I mean, there is no question about it. We must improve it. But I think this is a new priority.
Maybe two assessments.
And similarly on employment, I mean, that is the NREP program.
Would you have bill this budget now, up to now, as a budget for the poor?
I would not bill it. I mean, I think let us see what your other panelists.
What would you like to bill it as?
Well, I mean, I would not like to bill it as anything for the moment. I mean, let us see what the rest of us feel.
We're still halfway through the budget. As I was saying earlier, that the finance minister is taking much longer, or he's got a much longer speech than normal. By this time, I mentioned that finance ministers, we've timed their speeches in the past, would have finished their speech, they were wound up. But obviously, Mr. VP Singh has got a lot to say, and he's about to get onto the taxation part, and he's got a lot to say on that. But just before, and we've just heard that he's expected to end his speech at 7:10, so he's still got about half an hour, 25 minutes to go. We'll be following that, and this is where most of the people will be interested in each and every excise duty. We have Mr. L.K. Jha here, and we'll be coming to him shortly. But before that, I'd like to ask you, Lakshmi. You were talking about leakages. Do you feel that what should the government's approach be? When you've got problems, there are inefficiencies in a particular sector, do you not increase outlays till you completely make that efficient, or do you carry on and try to do both at the same time?
No, at the same time, after all, the Prime Minister visited many rural areas and found the difficulties. Manmohan Singh said in the 7th plan, as I said earlier, that rural administration and panchayats being strengthened as decentralized. But you cannot implement any program without institutions. So if
I think that was the point that Professor Khushro was making earlier.
Yes, so, and he made an additional point, I think, Professor Khushro, that these programs have remained weak and isolated because they were to be conducted in the context of area development block plans. These block plans are not being made. I have not yet heard a proposal that there will be a block plan. So you have isolated programs being launched there, but they are not durable. They may give benefit of an asset type or something, but what we are looking for is durable income generating activity. So I yet have not come across any suggestion, which may come later, that how does he propose to support them?
Yes. Omaresh, just quick response to this. What's your reaction so far to the budget, and what do you think is going to happen?
Well, on the expenditure side, I think the increases in these welfare programs should be welcome, provided, as you said, the net burden on the poor and middle class doesn't go up. Well, the two new schemes which I have just announced,
yes,
this new mutual fund,
yes,
and the higher depreciation for workers' housing, I suppose.
Yes, that's right.
New mutual fund,
Workers'
well,
housing.
that might be, I mean, that will be welcome to many, but I'm a little unhappy with this, because you also mentioned, if I have got it correctly, that it will be entitled to some capital gains relief.
No, I think what was pointed out was that it will be a subsidiary of the Unit Trust of India, and the Unit Trust of India already has a capital gains relief, so it will be operated on the same type of a basis.
Professor Khushro,
but this will be a growth fund. I mean, the idea is that those who want to go in for risk capital, they can buy this kind of thing which the Unit Trust would be operating in the mutual fund and enjoy that benefit. I mean, this is really to give the small investor the benefit of capital appreciation if he so wishes to choose.
Why I said a little uneasy about it is, I hope it's not a new instrument, because we're having a number of instruments carrying various kinds of tax benefits, which distort the entire picture, rates of return. Also, it distorts efficiency as well as equity. So from that angle, I was a little worried, but if it forms part of an existing scheme, then there should be no problem.
Professor Khushru, can I ask you now, up to now so far, what is your feeling about the budget? And we know it's a long speech and we'll be going on for another 25 minutes, but so far what's your reaction?
Well, let me give two reactions, although some more could be thought of as well. One is that the allocations to agriculture seem to have gone up very substantially. I think you mentioned, I only heard from you,
Yes.
that agricultural
Up by 29%.
29%.
Yes.
Now, you know, in the east of India and in central India, there has been a big problem with agriculture. The new techniques are not being adopted as rapidly as they should have been. Therefore, I think structural changes, building up of infrastructures, provision of irrigation, consolidation of holdings, land tenure improvement programs were much needed. And I should imagine that this extra allocation by a big percentage goes some distance in meeting that infrastructure.
What about the extra on education, 59%
Yes,
on
that's
that?
a very welcome thing. That's a sector I love, and
Yes,
I'm very glad. In fact, you know, there was under allocation, in my opinion, in the past in this sector, and things were languishing. I think the whole system has to be improved and toned up, and this is, to my mind, an important step in that direction. On the saving question, I have my last point
Yes, please,
just
please.
now, and that is...
That's on the savings announcements that they've raised the interest rates on public provident funds and employees' provident funds.
Right,
By
and
from
some other...
up to 12%.
Right. Now, the point is that it is being said that the rate of saving in India is tapering off. We have reached a high rate of saving, and now there is not much room left. Therefore, it's very important that some such incentives to save have to come up in order to keep the card going, rather than stagnation or decline in the rate of saving. Now, I can't tell what distance these measures will go. Seem to be relatively small to me. But the housing thing is very important.
Yes.
I believe now that if Indians will save more from now onwards, it will not be to hand over on a platter to the government so much as to invest in their own housing, save and invest themselves. Therefore, that scheme about housing that
Housing is important.
I saw a flash of.
That we should get the details in soon on that, actually. Well, thank you very, very much indeed. Suman, I just want to ask you something. The last budget was billed by some as a budget for the rich. This will obviously now be billed by some as the budget for the poor. Would you bill it as a budget for the poor and the budget for the rich? Ding dong?
I don't think it's either fair or possible to label budgets in this manner. I didn't agree with the last labeling, and anyone who says that this is a budget for the poor. I think that the point that the finance minister is making is that he's taking steps in a direction which was neglected last time, which didn't make the last budget.
Bimal? Suman said they were neglected last time. Were they neglected? And why were they neglected last time?
No, I think, personally, I don't think they were neglected. The last time was a different situation because the state plans were not finalized. Most of these schemes are shared between the states and the central government. And when the central government's budget was presented, it was not finalized. And last
Can I
year's
just come in
priority...
there? Just 1 second. That we've just had the latest on the 86-87. States' share in central taxes are up by 30%. The central plan assistance is just what you were talking about, actually. Central plan assistance to states is up by 38%. Total transfers to states, therefore, are up by 51%. And if we have that graphic again, we'll have some further highlights. Actually, the central plan on the whole is up 3,500 crores or by 20%. So we'll go back to the actual latest, but we found that what I was mentioning was the plan is up by 3,500 crores or by 20%. Sorry, Bimal, I interrupted.
No, the point is that last year, I think the priority was fiscal reform. I mean, this was the main priority. And as you see a flash there, which is probably not on your screens, that the tax collections from income tax, where the widest reforms were done, are actually 38% higher than last year. And the total taxes are 10% higher than the budget estimates. I mean, most of you would remember probably that the finance minister very early in the last year had said that he's going to raise 10% more than what the BE had provided, and he has done so. And the income tax is really truly
Can I
astounding.
just get to this budget latest, which is just before, at the end of his part A of his speech. we have that in the latest estimate of the central plan, according to the plan target of 180,000 crores and then 95,000 crores for the central plan, this was given in the long-term fiscal program. This year, the plan would be 20,000 crores. But actually, in this budget, they've increased that to 22,300 crores, which is 25% over 85-86 and 2,300 crores over what would have been allocated by a normal plan if you stuck to your 180,000 crores. Now,
I think it's 20.5. I mean, there's some mistake.
20.5%. Now, Lakshmi, 180,000 crores was considered a very large plan in the first place. That would have meant 20,000 crores this year if you were going to have, at least on the central side, 95 for 5 years and 20,000 for this year. But instead of, and 20,000 was large anyway, now they've made it 22,300. That's a greater emphasis on planning this year. I think the price, so if I just, before I get to you, when the price increases were made, administered prices about 3 weeks ago, often were mentioned that we need money for the plan. Is this an indicator of why those prices were raised?
Well, we would need to look at the whole scheme, to give a fair answer to that. But prima facie, if you say, I can say yes, but that would not get us anywhere. I was happy to see that the share of the states has been raised. But I just looked at the budget speech of the Karnataka Chief Minister,
yes,
the recent budget. He says the added problem is that there is a 70% loan factor in advances to the state, and in the sixth plan.
One thing I should mention that was also in the context of states, that this year, in 1985-86, states' overdrafts were no problem at all.
It's zero.
No,
Zero.
overdraft is a different thing, but the financing pattern, if you give 70% as loan and 30% as grant, and the states are supposed to do major part of the development work in the rural areas, then it would need to be somewhat reconsidered. Particularly, they say that in the sixth plan, yes, of the amount of loan they received from the central government, 74% was meant only for repayment of the previous loans.
Yes, yes.
So the net addition to development, we can have somewhat illusion with these big figures. We have to know exactly what is the net accretion.
Well, the big figures actually that we're talking about, if I quickly recap, so far this has been can be billed not only as a budget for the poor, but it can be billed as one of the longest speeches for a long time, because the large amount of the proposals have come in part A of the speech rather than the latter half, which we are just getting to in Parliament, where the finance minister is still talking. It's amazing. It's now 5 to 7 and he's still talking, and he's talking about taxes, which we shall soon be flashing on your screen. But before that, I'd like to welcome two people who've just joined the panel actually, who are perhaps most ideal to talk about taxes, particularly company taxes. We have Mr. Tandon here, PL Tandon, and also Mr. Tarun Das. Welcome, and any minute now we'll be calling on you to talk about each individual tax, how it's affected industry and how it's affected the common man. But what we've had so far really is a number of schemes talking about increases in outlays for different sectors, mainly plan sectors. The plan has gone up enormously, number one. Number two, employment generation schemes for the poor seems to be at least unprecedented increases in NREP, that's the National Rural Employment Program. There's lots, that's almost been doubled. Apart from that, to quickly recap, interests on savings for public provident funds and employee provident funds have gone up from 10 and 11% to 12%. And all kinds of new schemes for urban poverty, new subsidized loan scheme for the poor, it's called anti-poverty scheme, which is for basically for scheduled castes and scheduled tribes. And oh yes, one interesting factor, announcement, just like last year it was announced that the long-term fiscal policy would be prepared. The finance minister has announced that this year we'll have a long-term agricultural price policy. But basically, we are just about to get into part B of the speech, on which we'll be giving you details any minute. But before we get to that, I'd like just an overall view, while we're in between the two speeches, two parts of the speech, I should say, an overall view of the budget so far. Suman.
Well, the finance minister has clearly altered the character of budget making, budget speeches anyway, for all time to come.
Suman, we do have a graphic. Why don't you have a quick look at it and read it out?
Well, it's
The budget
18
latest.
For the coming year, it's the state's share of central taxes has gone up by 30%, and central plan assistance to the states by 38%, which means the total transfers to states is up 51%, which must be something near a record. Though I do remember there was a 27% increase in the central plan outlay at one point. The figure sticks in my head, which means that the 20.5% increase this year is very substantial. But it's
Suman,
not
I think
the
there's
highest
more
that we've
coming
had.
on.
Yes. Well, that's
what we've
yes,
just mentioned.
we
That was
this.
a-
There were no states overdraft problems
Yes.
in the year that's just about to end.
Well, Lakshmi, do you see this as a very different kind of budget to last year already?
Certainly, it's not a mundane budget. Last year, the emphasis was on rationalization of fiscal policy, and those who were under the tax net to see how they could be given certain amount of a rational treatment. This certainly seems to reflect that the priorities of the 7th plan in terms of program
There's
are
some more
being
flashes actually.
put on the ground.
We can just go to that. Rural development has gone up 50%. Agriculture has gone up by 29%. What would the normal kind of figures here be? Perhaps 10%, 8%, 15%. Education up 59%. Power up, that 25%, that's a quarter increase. That would be perhaps, if you take inflation is 5%, that means a 1/5 increase in actual real power generation. And programs for the 20-point program have expenditure has gone up by 22%. So we're clearly seeing the kind of emphasis of this budget already in all these developmental kind of expenditures.
Can I just clarify what I was saying? When I said that the finance minister changed the pattern of budget speeches, what I meant really was that he's put everything in part A. And if you're
everything, no.
not everything, but he's put all the meat in part A. And if Bimal is to be believed, everything else will be in just 15 minutes.
Well, we just heard that any minute now we're going to get the finance minister's coming to the part on direct taxes and company taxes. So we'll be knowing that in about a couple of minutes. We're just waiting for that.
May I just add two things? One, all the increases are welcome, but on education, we should not be too excited in the sense that the base was so low.
Yes.
We are at 3%. If you raise it even by 50%, I don't think it is just enough. And on the housing that has been done for scheduled castes, scheduled tribes,
Yes.
allocation and the scheme is most welcome, but the standard of housing given to them, I
Yes.
hope will be the same as is given in the Indira Gandhi Stadium for the sportsmen who come to live there.
But can we have one clarification? Because education and agriculture and housing and all these things are, Bimal, they're all divided between the centre and the states. So we don't really know whether these figures reflect the total or whether they reflect, we have something on the direct taxes.
Let's see, we've just got something on direct taxes, that is basically income tax, etc. There's a new funding scheme to replace investment allowance. Some of that, a hint of that was mentioned in the long-term fiscal policy. That's now implemented. I guess we're going to see different aspects of the long-term fiscal policy actually being implemented. And the surcharge on companies abolished in 1987-88. Was that actually said in the long-term fiscal policy,
Yes.
Dr. Jalan?
Yes, that's right. On direct taxes, I mean, those two proposals are from long-term fiscal policy, which was presented to Parliament in December. So it's just implementing those proposals now.
And we've also just heard that another graphic has come up, budget latest, the direct taxes, again, this is company tax and personal tax, investment allowance is to be discontinued after 1986-87, and surtax abolition has been postponed. Tarun, how do you react to that?
Doesn't look too good so far.
What doesn't look too good?
The graphics on corporate taxes, we were keen, I think, from industry to see a continuation of investment allowance to fund capital-intensive industries and their growth. Case has been made out to the government that this was required.
But hasn't it been replaced by another scheme?
It has been replaced by another scheme, the IDBI deposit scheme, and I presume this new fund scheme, which
Yes, that's right.
is the same thing that we are talking about. We had wanted a one-time option to be given to industry to choose between the investment allowance and the IDBI scheme. I take it that is not there in the. I think it must be very
Mr.
difficult
Tandon?
for Dr. Jalan to keep quiet in this program.
Yeah, would you like to say something?
I cannot speak on behalf of industry, which Tarun can better, but I'd rather welcome the investment allowance being replaced by a funding scheme, provided the funding scheme is growth-oriented and helps industry to improve technology. So under those circumstances, it could be an excellent nutritive measure that it will be channeled into expansion and technological
Can I just interrupt for a minute? We are going to get very shortly, apparently, according to the news from Lok Sabha, certain things on personal income tax. There's some things coming on standard deduction levels, the ceilings. We'll be having that in a couple of minutes. He's just getting to that. Sorry,
Yes,
please
so
continue.
I think the funding, the channeling of the funding to me will be more important. The purposes for which you can use the funding, and I would reiterate that they should be for upgradation of technology, higher productivity, and expansion and growth.
Bimal, in a word, what do you plan? What is the aim of this funding scheme, and how is it different from the investment allowance?
Well, the funding scheme, as I think the finance minister had said in his long-term fiscal policy statement, I mean, this is to provide an avenue for all companies to deposit 20% of their profits with the IDBI, and they can withdraw it as for the same kind of purposes that Prakash Tandon was saying, which is to invest in plant and machinery. I mean, as you know, one of the most important problems has been the lack of modernization or lack of replacement or lack of adequate updating of the capital stock in most companies. I mean, it is, so this provides you with a mechanism to save and then to invest. The investment allowance was the other way around, that you invested,
Yes.
had to invest first and then get the benefit. So I think that this is something, and the rationale for this whole thing was explained in great detail, I think. in
I
the
would
long-term
only hope,
fiscal
Bimal,
policy
that
statement.
the rules for funding are a little relaxed in the sense that you can show the purpose for which you're going to draw on the fund. And if the purpose is growth, upgradation, improved productivity, there should be no problem raised then.
Oh, of course.
Yes.
I mean, this is going to, I mean, the long-term fiscal policy has said so, that it's going to be very flexibly operated. I mean, there's no bureaucratic red tape here. And you wouldn't have income tax inspectors going there, looking at your plant and saying whether it can be done or not done. It's a simple scheme to be operated by people with whom you are dealing every day for funding, for financing your projects.
I should think under those circumstances, Tarun, wouldn't you welcome it for its own sake?
The objectives are the same of the investment allowance and the IDBI scheme, but our own assessment and calculations and a sample survey which we did of companies was that the investment allowance would meet those objectives better.
Right, I'll just now, what we're actually waiting for is these very up-to-date information on personal income tax that are coming through currently in the speech and should come on any minute. And we'll soon let you know about that. But up to now, let me just go quickly through what's already happened. At the earlier part of the speech, where the finance minister spent a lot of time trying to explain all his new policies, it's a much, much longer speech than normal, as I've said earlier. He came out with a proposal, just like last year, a long-term fiscal policy. He's now come out with a long-term agricultural pricing policy, which he says is to correct imbalances in cropping pattern. The speech, as I said, is still going on, and it's most unusual. It's past 7 o'clock, and I wonder if this is some kind of record. But the other schemes were, there are a number of anti-poverty schemes. There is a scheme of housing for the scheduled caste and scheduled tribes, a big boost, 65% up on IRDP, NREP, and RLEGP. These are mainly for the poorest of the poor and for employment generation. There's a new subsidized loan scheme for the urban poor, big increases in rural development, agriculture, particularly, I mean, and particularly in REP and RLGP, as I've just said, and education has gone up enormously. But as we were coming on to the specific proposals for industry, there's also, which I think we missed out, a postponement. Bimal, could you explain what exactly that was?
Yes, in the long-term fiscal policy, there was also an announcement that the surtax would be abolished from, I think, next year. That is 1987-88 fiscal year. Or
Can I just come in? There's something that's just come up on capital gains tax on the screen. We've had that the date of valuation has now been brought forward from 1974, the 1st of April, to 1964. This is an implementation of the long-term fiscal policy, and there'll only be 2 rates of deduction, 50% for land and buildings and 60% for all other assets. That is a substantial concession on the capital gains part of the for individuals. We also have that the capital gains, the exemption limit has gone up, has been doubled from 5,000 to 10,000. So 2 fairly major concessions on capital gains. Suman, how would you react to that? Because is this, part of it is implementation of the long-term fiscal policy, but I think the second bit, exemption limit going up, is a new proposal.
I think it's largely because there's been a demand for this kind of thing for a long time from various sectors of industry and from tax people. I think it's a recognition of the need to allow people to make to retain a little more of the profit. That
Sorry,
they make on
there is
shares.
a budget flash actually on gift tax. We've just heard that exemption is up from 5,000 to 20,000. It's gone up 4 times, exemption on gift tax. The flat rate, there's going to be a flat rate of 30% on the value of gifts, and there's something which Bimal will explain on the aggregation of provision for gifts has been deleted. Secondly, on valuation of gifts, apparently it's going to be made much simpler. There are going to be simpler rules for jewelry and shares for the valuation of this. Preemptive right of the government. Oh, this is an interesting thing which is being implemented. The government has the right to acquire properties above 10 lakhs in cities without question. It has a preemptive right. Bimal, could you explain this bit about gift tax?
Yes, I think this is a very major reform which was mentioned in the fiscal policy statement. I mean, you would recall that Finance Minister had said that he wants to retain the gift tax, even though the state duty had been abolished, because this helps him to check on income tax payments. Now, I think what he has done is a major reform of the whole gift tax system. I mean, you would recall that gift tax, really a lot of criticism was made about gift tax, including, I think, the L.K. Jha's report on the Economic Administration Reforms Commission, saying that you are raising only about 10 crores. So why all this fuss? And it was an act running into a couple of 100 pages and so on and so forth. So what he has done now, that he has really reduced the whole act, Gift Tax Act, to 3 or 4 lines.
I see. So
And,
there's
the
basically a major simplification on the gift
A
tax.
major simplification, and the rates have been so designed that you really cannot escape income tax by gifting. You know, I mean, that is the important point. That
Right, we're getting
major simplification.
We're getting a part of the second part of the speech, and we have Mr. L.K. Jha with us, and I'd just like to get his reactions to the budget so far, overall, and plus some of the specific proposals on gift tax and company tax. Part A is this, and Part B, the 2 parts of the budget.
So far as the tax side is concerned, on direct taxation, one of the promises being fulfilled is that as the value of money keeps going down, you will have to make adjustments. And therefore, the limits are being raised for exemption. 5,000 rupees when it was fixed is equal to about 20,000 rupees now. So it is not a relief, but a recognition of a real change in the value of the rupee. Otherwise, they have kept in with the projections made in the long-term fiscal policy. The rationale has been spelt out. And also, I believe it will lead to a simplification in procedures. People should pay taxes, but their patience should not be taxed, their energy should not be taxed, and some of the changes made are of a nature which would simplify the process of tax collection.
But can I come in and ask you another question? You're quite right that prices have gone up, and for the man on the street, prices should keep in touch with inflation. All deductions should keep in touch with inflation, I'm so sorry. But equally, a rupee is equally difficult now, in fact more difficult for the government to raise that extra rupee. Now, with these deductions, which many of us would welcome from the personal point of view, from the point of view of efficiency, could you give us a leader in terms of how much more difficult it would be to mobilize resources? Expenditures are up a lot. Direct taxes have more or less followed the long-term fiscal policy. Where do we raise the resources from?
Well, the experience of this year has disproved the concept that a higher rate of tax gives you more revenue. Now, it is, as it was, the gift tax was giving a paltry sum of money. It was justified merely as an instrument of preventing tax evasion. So it is not a source of revenue. Now, that purpose will be better fulfilled with a lower rate, and it is my expectation that with lower rates, the actual realizations may show an improvement. I'm taking capital gains. It's quite possible that with the lower rates, there will be much more realistic announcement of the selling price and much less of the various subterfuges, including black money payments, which have been widespread. So like the reduction in income tax rates meant more revenue, the reduction in capital gains tax may well be beneficial to the revenue.
Mr. Jha, you are a very busy man, but would you just hang on for a minute? Let's go to Prannoy. As soon as they come in with indirect taxes, once indirect taxes start, we'll come back to you once again, because that's where you are an expert on.
All right.
Well, we've been having a number of bits of information coming in, and as I mentioned earlier, it is probably a record speech in the length of time it's taken. Perhaps, well, I wonder if the second half is going to be much shorter than the first, because the first was so packed with information that I think the finance minister is still talking, and normally finance ministers would have stopped about an hour ago, or an hour and 5 minutes, maybe by about 6 o'clock. But the speech perhaps is still going on. I'm not sure. We haven't heard, but from all information is still going on. We do have, if I can just recap the latest bit of information on gift tax, we have 3 proposals here. The exemption has gone up, exemption limit from 5,000 to 20,000, but as Mr. Jha has just said, a lot of that is compensates for inflation. The flat rate is now 30% on value, and the aggregate provision for gifts deleted. Now this means that earlier on, gifts each year used to be added up and there was a limit to it. Now it's not added up from year to year. Am I right, Bimal?
Yes. I mean, this is a major simplification. You know, formerly what used to happen was that if you gave something to your wife, you were allowed to give 50,000 in the entire lifetime. Now, so some chap somewhere has to keep a record of what Mr. Roy was doing, you know, throughout his life in terms of, you know, reaching that 50,000.
Or what your wife gave to you.
Or what your wife gave to you. Now, so
excuse me, I've just got a budget flash actually. This is will be interesting for most of our viewers. For salaried employees, this is on personal income tax, the standard deduction has gone up from 6,000 to 10,000. That's 4,000 people, 4,000 rupees extra for salaried earners only. I think it's just come on the screen from 25% personal income tax. Yes. There's something else just coming in. We've just heard also that the speech has just been finished, but there's a little time between information coming in and a lag between what happens there and what happens here, given our normal communication problems. But we have personal income tax, another bit of information, medical insurance premium for non-CGHS users, deduction has now been allowed. Could you expand on that a little bit, Bimal, and give us information?
Well, I think what is proposed here is that for those who do not benefit from government scheme or who are really not government employees, that you would have some kind of a scheme which will enable you to deduct insurance payments for medical insurance taken out from GIC. I mean, that's also another relief for the common man, as it were.
Suman?
But the standard deduction is quite major.
Suman, are you a common man and salaried employee, and is this going to affect you?
If Mr. Singh, if Mr. VP Singh is not listening, I'd rather not say. But yes, the standard deduction is going to help everybody. That much more disposable income. I think it's in recognition of the very same thing that Mr. Jha was saying, that
Lakshmi, we noticed one thing about this. This is for salaried employees. It's not basically for all income earners. It's for salaried people. Is this a recognition that? Am I right there?
Yes, it is for salaried, because salaried employees, because the rest of them get their expenses deducted anyway.
I see.
If you're a professional person.
I see. That's the rationale behind it.
That's right.
Or is it that you recognize that salaried employees are very faithful payers of tax?
No, I think that is that recognition also, that you are not able to shift the burden of any additional, cost.
I mean, expenses are,
so
much more difficult to monitor.
Yeah, of course.
Would you welcome such a step?
Yes, but as Mr. Jha has pointed out, that much of what we are doing is rationalizing the inflation.
Yes.
That 6,000 has become archaic in the given cost. So 10,000 today has the same value as 6,000 had some years ago.
We're getting a lot of information now coming in, which will be coming on the screen about excise duties, etc. And apparently, mod VAT is being introduced in a big way, and we'll be coming to that shortly, and we'll be discussing it with you. But as just getting back to this standard deduction going up on salaried employees from 6 to 10,000, is that, when was 6,000 fixed? Is that just compensating for inflation?
No, I think it's more than that, because my recollection is 6,000 was last year, or maybe year before. I mean, it was either last year or the year before. So by raising it from 6 to 10, I mean, it's quite a major concession to the salaried.
Now we've got some more information now. If I can get back on indirect taxes, this is excise duties, what is known in the jargon as indirect taxes, excise taxes. Mod VAT, not Mad VAT, has been introduced, as Bimal has just told me, it's not Mad VAT, has been introduced in 37 specified chapters of excise tariff. Now we don't know which one these are, but there are a large number of them. And there's new excise concessions for the small-scale industry sector, I believe. Bimal, could you tell us a few more details on these, which give some examples of industries or which is the small-scale sector? I've just heard, did I mention this earlier, that the finance minister has sat down? I did mention it earlier. So you can now say anything without any trouble about leaking the budget.
I won't take your word for it.
Could you tell us a little more about which of these 37?
Yes, you see, mod VAT, I mean, this is, I think, for the viewers, it should be explained what it is. I mean, this is the value-added tax, about which a lot has been written, a lot has been spoken. And I think Mr. Jha, who is with us, is an authority on this.
Yes, we must get to Mr. Jha on this very shortly, because I think it is his original conception, actually.
That's right. In 1976, I think, or 77, that he had first asked for it. And now this has been implemented in 86 by the present finance minister. The main thing of benefit here is that this what is called tax on tax, that if you bought some inputs, if you bought compressor or you bought something and put into a refrigerator, now that refrigerator paid tax on that compressor, which had already paid tax, and also there was a duty on the refrigerator. Now what is being done here, I mean, I do not know whether refrigerator is included or not, by the way. This is purely as a matter of illustration. That what is being done here.
Surely you do know, you're not letting on.
No. I mean, I'm not an expert on this line at all.
Okay.
But so what is being done here now is to say that the tax, the excise duty, would be levied only on that part of it which you yourself manufacture.
There's another budget latest, if I could just interrupt, Bimal. We have a budget latest which says that special excise duties on 32 items have been removed altogether. And there is a new package of incentives for edible oils. I think this ties up with what the finance minister was saying earlier about about a lot of imbalances in cropping pattern, and that we need to boost our domestic production of certain kinds of things that we are currently importing. Now, can we go back to this special excise duty on 32 items?
Yes, that is a continuation of the reform that he had started last year. You see, we have a number of different kinds of excise duty on the same product. I mean, 5% of this, 2% of that, 2.5% of something else, and so on and so forth. There is a reason for each of these.
I see.
What finance minister had announced last year was that he would try to do some simplification. I mean, all simplification in our system is really not possible, because you have the states, some taxes which are shared with the state, some which are not shared with states, and so on and so forth. But this, now at least there would be one less entry in the ledger books, so far as the special excise.
It's basically a kind of simplification.
Yes, this is simplification. I think most of these
will there be a revenue, will there be revenue loss involved? I mean, is it a concession?
No, I think that, I'm not quite sure on that point. You may be surprised, but this is...
not letting on again.
How much simplification is involved in all these? How much are we getting rid of
you see, I would say that on the direct tax side, for example, what he has announced on the gift tax and the capital gains, these I would, as an economist, I would regard them as very major simplification exercises, that you really would know what is your tax liability without having to go to your tax consultant, which is a major gain, and without having to have a dispute with the income tax.
Not for tax consultants.
Not for, well,
No, they will have other business anyhow.
But
Can I just get to Mr. Tandon? I just want to ask you something about ModVat before we go across to Mr. L.K. Jha. By ModVat, does it mean that at each stage of inputs into the final product, where people used to be paying excise duties at each stage, it's now all that those people don't have to pay excise duty anymore, and it's going to come to it's going to be all levied at the end, or they're going to be only paid on whatever the value, they're going to pay, only going to pay taxes on the value added in their product?
This is a question I wanted to ask Bimal.
Go ahead.
Bimal, will it mean that it will abolish the cascading effect of duties?
Precisely.
I see. Well, that I think is greatly welcome. Because
Tarun, how do you welcome this?
I think that's very good, and we've been looking forward to this simplification which was mentioned in the LTFP, and I hope that in this list of products, steel is included.
And how does it, I mean, just give me an example, and an everyday example. How does ModVat help you rather than, as opposed to excise?
Well, if this concept, as I understand it, I mean, if you take automobile industry, there are many components, there are raw materials, there are different stages of processing, and this applies to all engineering industry. And I think you're paying tax at every level, at every stage. And ModVat, I think, should
I'd
get
like to
away
go
from
to
that.
L.K. Jha shortly, actually, as soon as we can get the cameras organized. They have to be swung around. But
I'll give you an example, if I may.
Yes.
We did a study some years ago on refrigerators. And the cascading effect of the duty, where every compressor, steel going in, paint going in, had borne a duty already, came to 167% of the ex-works cost.
Good Lord.
Now, I hope
Good
this
Lord.
will simplify the pyramid effect of duties.
I see. Now, if we could just go to probably one of the country's real experts on this particular topic, ModVat versus excise duty, and get an everyday man's view of it. If we could turn to L.K. Jha and get his views on this, please.
For viewers who've just tuned in now, I'd like to first start with a piece of news that the Finance Minister has introduced the modified value-added tax, which goes by the name of ModVat. Sitting with me here is Mr. L.K. Jha, an expert on cascading effects of multi-point taxes. Now that they have introduced your scheme, Mr. Jha, do you feel relieved, satisfied, happy? It's been a long battle.
Yes, indeed, I'm very happy. And I should like its significance to be understood. It is not just cascading, but social justice suffers if you tax inputs. Let me give you an example. If you tax steel sheets, it affects not only the refrigerator, but also the galvanized iron sheets used for working class hutments. So by taxing the inputs, you hurt the rich and poor in a way you don't even realize. Now, originally, this practice was adopted because it was felt it is so much simpler to tax the inputs than finished products. But once you start taxing the finished products in their own right, there is no reason to tax the inputs except to guard against the danger and possibility that the inputs may be sold in their own right. For example, a battery goes into a car as a component, it's also sold as a replacement. So you want to keep the tax on, but to arrange that it does not fall on the car. Another point to remember is that when the tax is levied on the input, the manufacturer of the final product has to finance it by borrowings. So the increase in the final price is more than the revenue which comes to government because costs are raised.
Now, can I ask for a small clarification? In England, for instance, the value-added tax has been there for a very long time. It's called the VAT.
Yeah.
Now, what is the modified part which makes it ModVat?
Well, what we had recommended from my committee was manufacturer's value-added tax, because it was meant for certain manufacturers only.
That was ManVat.
ManVat.
Yeah.
Now, mod VAT is a modification of the VAT idea to suit Indian conditions. It's not going to extend to all the items, to a select range of items, and gradually spread. Now, the conditions in England are different in that there is one taxing authority. Here, we have got an interaction with the states also. There are many complications involved. So all I would say is that it is a modified form. We couldn't adopt the British model lock, stock and barrel. Secondly, it involves a fair amount of bookkeeping. That could not be easy for many of our producers.
May I ask one last question? Something that Bimal chose not to speak on when asked, I'd like to ask you. It's a very good idea to have value-added tax and tax at the end instead of continuously taxing all the way through. But the final question is, will the new tax be a lower burden on the commodity than the cascading effects? Now, if it is lower, how much revenue would one lose?
No, I think it would be more rationally distributed. I don't think the idea is to reduce the total tax burden. Now, take an example on this insulin, which people take for diabetes drug. The nominal excise duty, when I looked into it, was only 2%. Oh, we can't tax it too much. But the actual taxing of it was 27%. Now, this was a fortuitous taxation without meaning to. So now you will have to aim at final rates of taxation, which will mean a more equitable spread of the burden rather than a reduction of the tax burden.
We now move on to Prannoy, who must be all agog with all sorts of news.
It's, we've heard just now that excise duty, we've just got a graphic computer latest on that, excise duty has been reduced on 74 items of machinery in gems and jewelry. And all shoddy woolen blankets have been exempted from excise. Finally, we do have it just before the finance minister sat down. He gave us the budget deficit for this year. The budget deficit is to be, and we've just got it on the screen, 3,650 crores. That is about 3,000 crores higher than the budget estimate last year, but it is about 800 crores lower than the revised estimate for last year, if I'm right.